Good morning. So we're coming to the end of chapter 2 of the Tzemach Tzedek's Shoresh Mitzvahs HaTfilah. Sorry, keep on making that mistake. Mitzvahs Haamonas Elokus. Chapter 2 of his description of the mitzvah to believe in God. So I hope to be able to finish it today, and we're going to see some beautiful language. And he's really going to wrap it all up, because a lot of the ideas we already have, and now he's just going to close it all down, make it relevant, and address what he opened up with in the beginning of chapter 1, or at the way back at the beginning, which is how to classify the various different mitzvahs. That's what we're going to be discussing today. So where we are at this particular moment is, we finished describing, or we're middle of describing, the difference between dat, to intimately know something as true, even if I don't understand it, versus faith, which is something, my relationship to that which is transcendent. That's essentially what we're middle discussing. Intimate knowledge of something that's true, even if I don't understand it, versus accepting and having faith in that which is beyond and transcendent. I can't even experience it. It's so beyond. I can't even understand, certainly can't understand it. And the essence of the knowledge, the intimate knowledge, is the knowing that Hashem is the life of all that exists. Using the parallel of my own experience of life, it's a physical flesh, but I see that it is enlivened by a me that's inside, a spiritual soul me that's inside this physical flesh that's enlivening it. So I see a living universe. I can see and observe that there is a livingness that pumps through all of existence, and that's my intimate knowledge of Hashem's presence in all, as the livingness of all of existence. And therefore we start to explain that feeling that is what opens up the emotional relationship with God. And therefore I want to connect with the life of life, because that is life, and I don't want to do that which is going to disrupt my connection to the life of all life, namely mitzvah versus sin. This is where we are at this current moment, yeah? This is all familiar, hopefully? Sorry. Okay, so the last thing he said is that the dot that we have, this intimate knowledge we have of God, stems from dot of the divine system, which is the internalized investment of God into reality. And therefore, juxtaposing that, the second paragraph on the top of the page, Masha enkein Haamonas, by contrast, faith, Shorsho miprinas keser malchus. Its root is not from dat, which would be the internalized system, but rather from what's known as keser malchus, or the crown of sovereignty. Crown being that which transcends the head and the mind, as opposed to dat, which is in the mind. Shehu prinas MAKEOVER vala malchus. That is that which transcends and envelops the level of malchut, rather than is internalized into the level of malchus. And therefore, and that which from this level there shines forth into every Jewish soul faith. Therefore the faith also remains in a transcendent sort of level, because its source above is transcendent. Just like a crown that's positioned above the person's mind. But is not internalized to open up one's emotional experience. Right, as we quoted the Gemara, which said that a thief can be standing at the threshold as he's about to break into someone's home, and pray to God, please help me. Because he has faith in the abstraction of the truth of God, but hasn't internalized it. Right? Faith being an abstract connection to that which is beyond. Yeah? And therefore, it's true everybody has faith, and faith stems from the divine keter transcendence, and therefore, in the person's experience, it remains transcendent. Right? As opposed to dat, which is internalized. Yeah, this is what we started talking about last week. Therefore, now, I want to try my best to translate the next page or so as literally as possible, because I want to hoping to relay a flavor for the beautiful language that the Tzemach Tzedek uses here in describing this. Therefore, Amar, meaning I'm going to read the whole page and translate and maybe explain after, but I want to just literally just translate. Okay. Amar, therefore the verse reads, Da salakei, know God your Father. Da daika, specifically know intimately. Tahainu, this means to say, Shakol masha tucha lagil Elokus yisparech, everything that you can possibly reach about His godliness, b'fchinas das, using the element of intimate knowledge, tishtadlu bazeh, put your efforts there, the tamik machshaveisecha, and deepen your thoughts in that realm. V'hainu, and this is Yidiyas mitziyusai, the knowing of God's existence, even though I don't understand it. Vishahu, and the fact that He is Chayei HaChayim, the life of all life, Keniskele Il, as we explained above. Va'oz, and then Tehapech le'ish acher, you will be transformed into a new person. Ki yiftechu midei secha, because your heart will be opened. La'avas Hashem, to love God. Good morning. U'leyira oisayen, to be in awe of Him. Ki adas, because one's das, one's intimate knowledge, hu mafteach, is the key, etc. to the experience. By having this feeling of God's presence in everything, as mentioned above. Omnam, however, that which one cannot reach through this intimate knowledge, leave it to faith. To believe with complete faith. After having known intimately His existence, and that He is the life of life, in real, actual feeling, comparable to seeing something with one's eye. And if so, that which I cannot achieve in this manner, will be relegated and be left to faith. So that's the part that I want to translate literally, just to give you a flavor for the language you're using here. As you try your best, so whatever it is you could possibly experience, push yourself to experience as much as you possibly can. And then you become a new person, to use His words. Your heart's open, you can feel love of Hashem, fear of Hashem, because you've intimately connected with this information. And whatever it is you feel like you can't connect to it because it's too beyond, that's okay. Leave it to faith. But that faith, he writes here, is after you know, after having pushed the limits of what you can know, now you leave the rest to faith. Right? This is where I got this notion that I mentioned in the past, that faith is mistakenly understood as meaning shut your brain off and just accept. It's not what it is, it's the reverse. It's open your mind up and push it to what it can possibly understand, and then accept that which is beyond His faith. But not that you're closing your intellectual experience down. On the contrary, you're investing a lot in trying to understand and connect to whatever you possibly can. And that which you can't, leave it to faith. But only after you've already pushed the limits of what you can experience and know. It's a whole different appreciation for what it means to have faith. Okay.
It'll be different on different days.
Certainly. Yeah.
Okay.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
Well, look, if it's going to depend on emotional experience, then yes, it's going to be different on different days.
Right.
Maybe different hours too.
And
right?
different for different people.
And different for different people, it's correct. That's right. So that's the unique thing here. About the dot, he discusses in this chapter, which I mentioned a couple of classes ago. Usually, dot is connecting to a specific concept. So there's a certain concept, connect to it. But here, actually, he's not talking about connecting to a specific concept. He's talking about connecting to the presence of God in everything. And once you connect to that, then everything else gets opened. Right? He compared it to a person who feels himself, and because I feel myself, therefore what I like is much more felt. What I don't like is much more felt, as opposed to when I'm distracted and I don't feel myself so much. So here the dot he's referring to is not necessarily a specific feeling about God, but just the very essential feeling of God's presence. And that key opens up to all of them various different emotions, every person and every time for different things at different times. But it's the inherent feeling of God's presence. And He's here and in everything. Right? Just like I feel myself, and therefore all the other feelings follow. So I feel God's presence, and then everything else follows. So it's not the usual dot that's explained in Chassidus elsewhere, which is usually a function of a particular issue that I'm trying to connect with. Is that somewhat clear? Okay. Now, V'shayr is that, we're 6 lines up from the bottom. V'shayr is that, and the source of this ability to have faith in that which is beyond, this is a ray of light from the divine crown that transcends His sovereignty. Which is its root is in turn the higher level of divine transcendence. That transcends even wisdom. The nikra, this is referred to as soivev kalamim, that which envelops all of existence. Which its idea is Elokus, revelation of God, which is beyond intellect or grasp, as will be explained. So I'm going to leave this alone for now because it's going to become the subject of further chapters to try to give more language to what this means, that there's a revelation of God that's beyond comprehension. So I'm going to leave that for later chapters. He's going to explain that.
But that's Keter.
Which is associated with Keter. He gives 2 levels of Keter, Keter Malchus versus Keter itself, but yes, Keter. Yeah, as opposed to Dat Yisoid, which we spoke about last week, which is the internal experience. Okay. So now, sorry?
Keter Malchus is in the world of Malchus.
Atzilut. It's in the world of Atzilut, but it's going to be explained in further chapters, but essentially it's either the Keter of divine communication or the Keter of God himself. Keter Malchus versus Keter itself. Something like that. Yeah, a little bit of Kabbalistic topography, but we'll leave that for now.
But the keter is basically just one step above everything.
Yeah.
It's just this.
Okay, so everything repeats itself on every model.
Right.
So in every model you have the internal and you have the transcendent, right? So even when I communicate to you now, that's what I'm communicating, and then there's that which I'm not communicating. But that which I'm not communicating remains like hovering and transcendent over that which I'm communicating. Now if you back up even farther to what I'm feeling, there's what I'm feeling, and there's what I'm not feeling, which is transcendent. You back up even farther, there's my mind, what I understand, and then there's the keter, what I don't understand. Right? So in every level you have the internal and the transcendent. And so the model keeps on repeating itself in every level. Essentially. In the same way we explained last week how the internalization of every communication repeats itself on every level, so does the transcendent repeat itself on every level. Right? Okay, but again, I don't want to go down too far down this road. Okay, now at the conclusion of the chapter, which again I hope to be able to conclude it today, we should be able to, is he now closes out the discussion on how you classify the mitzvahs. Right? Because we had a few different ideas. One is the notion of God himself is known before God commands, so that can't be the commandment. There was also this idea that if you can figure it out on your own, you don't need a commandment. There was that idea. And then there was a difference between some of those who listed mitzvahs described it as faith, and others described it as knowledge. So with all the information in the last two chapters, we can now clarify all these various different views and where they're coming from, and what is a mitzvah and what's not a mitzvah, how you classify them. And specifically, it's going to be in three different categories, or three different views, as the president is going to describe.
What's the first two? I really see that.
So one is, you know God before he commands, right?
Yeah.
So there cannot be a commandment, believe in the commander. You already know the commander.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one problem. The other problem is, you know there's a commander, but you don't know anything about him, let's say. But if you can figure it out on your own, it shouldn't be a mitzvah.
I don't see how they're different.
The difference is, the commander could be a human also,
Oh.
right? But because you know about God, X, Y, Z, that's not a commandment either. That's a little further of a push. Yeah, okay. So let's see then. Now we can explain the views of all the various different sages who have listed the number of the mitzvahs. They disputed this, how to exactly frame the mitzvahs. Im lav, should we include the belief in God as part of the mitzvahs or not? There are different views. Das bal halachas gedolos, the opinion in the view of what we call the Bahag, the author of the Halachas Gedolos, his view is because the primary idea of knowing God, or knowing his existence, knowing his presence in all, is felt and understood, as we explained above. The person sees livingness in the world, and therefore he knows God's there. He knows there's a livingness. So because it is known, in Cain, therefore, lo yitachen tzivui al zeh, his view is no reason for commandment. Ki tzivui ein neifel, because a command is only relevant to a davar sheish by b'chira, where a person is presented with options, with a choice. Skip the parentheses. Oy b'deos, either choice in how to understand something, oy b'machshava, or in thought, how to think about something, v'dibur, or how to act. Lachshav or lachshav, whether to think or not to think. L'daber, to speak, or l'daber, not to speak. Lasses, to do, or lasses, not to do. That's where mitzvahs apply. When you have two options in front of you, you can do one or the other, and Torah is saying do this, not that. Or say this, not that. Think this, not that. That's something that Torah commands. Aval davar hamurgish and nigel ayin, but something that is felt and obviously experienced to one's eye, ma'yitachan tzivui alzeh. Lahargish l'mnoim lahargish. There's no command, feel it or don't feel it. Achashem morgish, considering that it's there. In other words, there is no command which says, thou shalt believe you're walking on the earth. Because you're walking on the earth. There's no command that which is obviously known. And therefore, says the Baal Halachas Gedolos, his view is, it's obviously known that there's livingness in creation, so no commandment, thou shalt know there's livingness in creation. You can't opt out of it. Mitzvahs are only commanded to that which you can opt out of. And because the truth of livingness of all existence like we spoke about this, even a scientist who is studying the world acknowledges there's a livingness running through creation. He doesn't call it God, fine, don't use that word. But the notion that there is a singular livingness that pumps through all of creation is a known reality. You can't opt out of it. And a mitzvah is, you can either do it or not do it. It says Torah, do it. And therefore says the Bahag, I'm not going to count believing God's presence in all as a mitzvah. It's an obvious reality that everybody sees. You can't opt out of it. There's a livingness in creation. As he says on the top of the page, Sharei Anuroyim, because we see Ha'olam, the world, Chai v'Kayim, is living and existing, Mechaya Chayim, from the life of all life. Doesn't use the word God. But you see that the world is alive and there's livingness in it. That's it. As we explained before, chapter 1. Yeah.
What is that? That's just...
Therefore he says, it's not, there's no reason to command. It's just a reality of life. And the same way there's no command, you should know you're walking on the earth, because it's just a reality of life.
Right, so all humanity has that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
It's a reality.
Thing,
It's not a Jewish thing. It's
just
precisely right. That's right. That's right. Torah commands that which is uniquely behavioral to you because you could choose some other behavior.
Right, but
Or
we
some other
just said
thought.
that there is das, which is delving into it.
So that's going to become those who will say it is a mitzvah. That's the counter view, right? Okay. Therefore, the Bahag decides he's not going to include it in the number of mitzvahs because it's an obvious reality. However, Harambam Visyaitoi, the Rambam and those who follow his approach, and the Rabbi Yonah and those who are of his view, they do include knowing God as a mitzvah. Taimam, their rationale is, the commandment is not to know it as a fact, but al hamakas hadas is to delve one's mind deeply. Vizbunnas, no worries, morning. Vizbunnas b'davar zahayidua. The commandment is to consider and contemplate that which you already know. Of this one can command. Because even if the concept is known, nonetheless, if I don't continuously focus on my attention on this fact, and allow myself to be distracted by other things, the knowledge that God is present in all will have no effect, will be of no consequence. And even if I just think of it in passing, it still won't have any effect. Has to think about it deeply, specifically. And then the emotions will be open, my heart will be opened. So there is a command. So whereas the Bahag is saying, look, you know it already, no need to command. Says Rambam, well, you can know things from today till tomorrow, it's not going to change you. So says the commandment, this fact you know about God, because you see the world is alive, think about it and think about it and think about it to the point that you start to be moved by it. Now that one can command, that's a very serious and heavy command, right?
So it's like, so the first one when he says to know God, it's just simply as a concept. The second one when it says to know God is actually
exactly
a constant basis
correct.
of knowing God, right?
So whereas the Bahag was looking at the concept and says, you know the concept, no mitzvah. Rambam and Rabbi Yonah are saying, it's not about the concept, we know that exists. It's about connecting to that concept and really thinking about it. Right? That's a really heavy command now. It requires a lot of work to remind yourself to think about it and again to the point that I'm emotionally moved by it. That is not an easy command. So Nemar, of this the verse reads, you shall know today, take it to heart, which means you have to know it so deeply that it actually take it to heart. And not just conceptually know it as an abstract. Okay, so that's with respect to the mitzvah of knowing. Two views. Knowing the concept, no reason for a mitzvah. Knowing the act of engaging with it so that you feel it, yes, mitzvah according to Rambam and Rabbi Yonah. Now what about faith?
Sorry, I'm just going back to humanity. Everyone should be doing this? This is for everyone or just for Jews?
So now the question is, are non-Jews obligated to delve deeply into the knowledge of God to the point that they feel it?
Right.
Very good question. And I don't know if I can answer the question directly, but I'll indirectly answer the question. The Rebbe once said that the Rebbe was very expansive in terms of non-Jewish obligation. Besides for the 7 Noahide laws that are universally accepted, that are the universal mitzvahs, the Rebbe even went so far as to say that tzedakah is a mitzvah for non-Jews, even though it's not in the list of the 7 Noahide. The Rebbe pointed to certain views that are of that view. And the Rebbe also once said that because the first of the 7 Noahide laws is belief in God, therefore they should also study Shara Yichud V'Amunah. The part 2 of Tanya that we studied for a year, non-Jews should study it too. Now this, some of the old school, maybe people who remember the old school Hasidim were like a little bit taken aback by that statement. But of course they stood by it and didn't, If they're supposed to believe in God, then why should they be sold short on God's truth? Let them learn about it. We learned Shayach and there was nothing there about doing any mitzvahs. It was all about the nature of God Himself. So why should? So I don't know if that's the answer to your question, but at least indirectly.
Imagine how much better the world would be if they did.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's start with ourselves. I'm finding it hard to internalize,
Yeah.
and we have access to this.
Is
so
there a law though about non-Jews learning the Torah? Like I remember.
So there is the Gemara does say about non-Jews shouldn't learn Torah because it's like they're interrupting in a private conversation. Like Torah is a private conversation between God and the Jew. Like why are you interrupting? But at the same time, any part of Torah that's relevant to their mitzvahs, they're obligated to know. So
let's say a non-Jew, let's say coming to a Jewish school, like it's just like it's an interesting.
It's not so simple.
Maybe
it's not so
if they
simple.
wanted to join a Torah class, like why not? Like if they want to learn Torah,
I suppose so. There is a Gemara which talks about speaks about a non-Jew studying negatively, but at the same time, I don't know that I would kick a non-Jew out of my class if the guy showed up. I don't think I would do that.
But like, is it
nonetheless,
likely frowned upon to teach?
There are such sources,
non-Jews,
yeah. There are such sources, yeah.
But there's two ways to look at it. Like it's not.
I don't know.
like
I don't know of a counter
black
view.
and white.
The counter view would be, don't make a chilul Hashem. Like, don't desecrate God's name by
Also, they
mistreating
could be
people.
a ger, right? You never know.
Then certainly, but here there was chiddush. Here is that there's a whole section of Torah that they should learn, including these deep secrets of like Hasidus, which is like mind blowing for many. Anyway, so I don't know if that answers the question, but
The reason I just thought of it is because we all live life, and we also
Right.
live in this in the world, but like
Right.
we can get distracted by our lives, and we don't think about it ever,
Yeah.
or really. So if the mitzvah is to actually think about it and whatever.
So there's,
furthermore, actually, sorry, yeah.
I mean, there's like the theory of learning like actually deep within, but like practically speaking, reflecting on Hashem, this is something that like they're always talking about like a moment of silence in public school.
Right. Exactly.
Right, there, like there's a little time to reflect. I don't know if your mind goes there naturally in this way, but that's kind of the concept.
Yeah. So that's right. So you're 100% correct. So I don't know if that counts as a mitzvah, but certainly something that Deborah would have encouraged, definitely. Whether it's a mitzvah or not, I cannot say for sure. I don't know. I'll also add that Rambam writes that a non-Jew who behaves morally, but does so because they want to live morally, he calls them mechachmei umas ha'olam, from the wise people amongst the nations. You're wise enough to behave like a moral person. But one who, the chasidi olam ha'olam, the pious amongst the nations, are those who behave morally because God told Moses at Sinai we have to behave morally. If they have that awareness, now they're not just the wise, they're the pious, the chasidei. So that's another component that is relevant to non-Jews, not just to behave morally or even know God, but actually to engage with the revelation at Sinai, which adds another layer to this.
So they have to believe in Sinai.
That's right. And then they become, and if they do that, says Rambam, they get to heaven. Gan Eden.
So it's interesting because all
Rambam
Christians
writes that, yeah.
believe that.
Oh, that's a very
interesting.
so that's a huge discussion. Exactly, if Christianity qualifies as idol worship, and not all Christianities are made equally. So it depends on which version of Christianity. That's a whole other discussion. But certainly, ironically,
It's just funny
the
way
Muslims
they
are
do it.
pure in this way.
Are they not?
Yeah, they are, because they don't believe in. They believe in one God. There's no Trinity or anything like that.
And they actually believe in the prophet.
And they believe in the prophet Musa,
Musa, yeah.
Musa, which is Moses. So, as long as they're not blowing people up, go live a moral good life.
My kids want to know this when it comes to Christianity because they learn about in Sefer Mitzvahs, like they learn in Stone about what you need to do with an idol worshiper and how you can't like.
It's a very serious question.
The defined halachas that revolve around treating an idol worshiper.
Yeah. So I'm not sure you want to get into a discussion with the children about the various different natures of Christianity, but it depends on their version of the Trinity, basically, and how literally they take it. The more literal you take the Trinity, the closer you get to idol worship. There are some on the spectrum who, I think, like the Greek Orthodox, who are very non-literalistic in the Trinity. They believe much more in a oneness. Whereas if you go to like the Catholicism, which is much more corporeal in their belief of the Trinity, and that becomes borderline idol worship, if not outright idol worship.
You're talking about believing
In
in
the-
him being the Son of God, like that,
Or even
that part?
him being God, period. God materialized.
But none of them. I don't think that
Yeah.
that's
It
really.
depends where you go in the Catholic, how far you go down the Catholic spectrum. Some of them do believe in the actual physicalized, materialistic God. So you go to the other end, it's much more of conceptual thing that maybe could look more like a oneness. Anyway,
I mean, they
another
think
realm.
he's in a sense like they're Mashiach in a sense. Like,
Okay.
does that
It's a little bit
mean
confusing. Is the Mashiach?
is he like a Messiah?
Messiah,
versus
son of God,
versus
part of
the son
God? It's not just
an
something.
actual God. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not exactly clear, and there's different creeds, and depending on which creed they're associated with, that would change where they stand in terms of idol worship or not. At any rate, okay. So that's with respect to the mitzvah of knowledge. Dispute. Either we look at the concept, no reason for a mitzvah, or the act of engaging with that concept to the point that I feel it. That is a mitzvah according to Rambam and Rabbi Yoina. Now, with respect to the mitzvah of faith, the Gam as well, Hatzivoy ala Haamonas, the commandment to have faith. The commandment to have faith in that which you cannot achieve through classic knowledge or comprehension. So there is that element of, that's not something you knew before, it's something that's beyond your knowledge. So there certainly could be a commandment to be commanded to have faith in that which is beyond your understanding. And that's why the Rambam in his book where he enumerates the 613 mitzvahs, he writes, he says the mitzvah is to have faith in God. Whereas, Ubereish Sefer Amada, by contrast, not in his book of the mitzvahs, but in his book of the detailed laws, there he says, Amar he writes, Leida she'eshem matzir, to know there is a primary being. Right? So, in his book of mitzvahs, he lists it as faith. In his book of halacha, he lists it as knowing. And therefore, the kol bazeh, therefore we have to include both elements. Dvarim, base dvarim, two things. Shem yediyas mitzvah, the knowledge of God, of God's existence, hanoida b'das, which can be known through understanding and comprehension and connection. The Gama, number two, ha'emunah, the faith in Him. The Haim, and according to Rambam, these two are mitzvah achas, one mitzvah. Lahas and to focus your attention on that which you can know, the Gam lahaman kaniskalil, and that which you don't know to believe. In other words, Rambam is saying it's one action. The single action is think deeply about whatever you can possibly know and understand it as best you can. And whatever you can't is faith. It's one activity, one mitzvah. Whereas Rabbi Yoina, however, also mitzvahs. He divides it into two commandments. Mitzvah ha'emunah mipasek anaychi, the mitzvah to have faith from I am God your Lord. Mitzvah sadas, and the mitzvah of knowledge mipasek v'yadaita, from the pasuk which says, and you shall know today that God is your Lord, etc. Faith versus God. V'amar, and Rabbi Yoina writes, and now we quote him. Quote from Rabbi Yoina, the level of contemplating God's greatness, as it says, and you shall know God. And he continues, says Rabbi Yoina, this has been given to us as a positive commandment to know and think deeply about God's presence. Right? It doesn't just say to know it, but to to consider this knowledge, to think and to contemplate on it, to meditate on it. That's v'yadai ta'ayim. Anoichi, he says, is faith. The Sefer Charedim quotes Rabbi Yoina as such, that there's two mitzvahs. And therefore, now we understand the book of the Chinuch, that other book that lists the 613 mitzvahs, the one that the guy wrote for his son's bar mitzvah. So he writes there, Leida lahaman sheshaleka. He writes the mitzvah is to know and to have faith that there is a God. Meaning to say, that which you could know, you should know and think deeply about it. And that which you cannot know, you'll have faith, as we'll explain further. We'll talk about this idea of having faith. The EU and he, the Sefer HaChinuch, B'shittas Rambam Ka'azal, follows the view of Rambam, the Chashuv of Mitzvah Achas, that he incorporates both faith and knowledge in one mitzvah, the Minyan Taryag, in the list of the 613. Okay, so this closes out chapter 2 of this mitzvah Haamonas Elokus Mitzvah Tzedek. Chapter 3 begins. We start to move into the world of transcendence, having established that there is that which I can comprehend, there's that which I can intimately know, and then whatever I can't do with either of those has to be left to faith and transcendence. And that's what we're going to get to in the coming chapters, which is really going to be something we spoke about a while back, which is like the meeting of the infinite and the finite. Because that's the border here. You're especially if you consider it one mitzvah like Rambam does, to know that which you can, and then as part of that is, whatever you can't know is faith. So it's really about pushing the limitations of what is finite and then accepting those of infinite. So the whole discussion is going to be on where is that border? Where is the border between the infinite and the finite? So that whatever I can understand okay, I got that, and now there's something more.
Is this
That's
what
going to be the further
Mitzvah
chapters.
Masech, he agrees with this, it being one mitzvah?
He's not taking a side, but he's certainly going to. I don't know. I don't think he takes a side in that question, but it would seem like it would fit with Rambam, in that they're one and the same, two sides of one coin, that one flows from the other.
Well, it's very interesting. I would see it as two mitzvahs. It doesn't seem to me like one.
Right,
like
that's
really
Rabbi Yehuda's
separate
position.
things.
Rabbi Yehuda puts them as two different mitzvahs. One is to know, in other words, because a person could have one without the other. A person can have transcendent faith and never really think about God's presence here, but just think about a higher power, or whatever they call it. And a person can conversely have the other way around. A person can have deep experience of God's presence in all, but not have any concept or faith in something that's transcendent. So yeah, that's true. But nonetheless, Rambam combines the two, because as we just explained, they go together. And that will be further elaborated on God willing in the coming chapters. Yeah.
So back to Haamonas Gadol, I don't remember his name. He's the one who thinks basically faith is not part of the mitzvah, and it's just the knowing that is the.
It's a good question. What his view is on the mitzvah of faith. To the best of my knowledge, it is not listed as a mitzvah.
But
But
what I understood from what it was saying, like the part that you know it without having any information, that's like the faith part, and this part is not the mitzvah because you know it and there's no arguing with it. The problem is what you can know this one, and that's why.
Right.
Whereas Rambam takes the opinion is that what you know is what is the mitzvah, and
Mitzvah is to think deeply about it.
And by thinking deeply about it, whatever you can actually have, it's still going to be included in. So
Correct.
It's kind of like an after. It's not. Its primary focus is what you know, and as a consequence of what you know, the faith is pulled in with it.
Sounds like
kind of
yeah,
like how it's
yeah.
going.
You can frame it that way.
Which then brings me back to. I'm sorry. This is why I'm confused because then back to the first thing you said. So like the thief could actually have faith. I know there's a God, but it has a zero consequence on him.
Mm-hmm.
So where is he holding? Is he like
He might be fulfilling the mitzvah of faith, but not fulfilling the mitzvah of das.
Right, but
He's certainly not fulfilling the mitzvah of dat because he's not intimately connecting. But he's why would we compromise on his mitzvah of faith?
It's a Rambam. He's still partly in there, even though it's convoluted and.
Oh, good question.
So.
That guy's only doing half the mitzvah.
Half a mitzvah, yeah.
I guess so.
But how can you do half a mitzvah? It's either you do it or you don't do it.
Well, a person can keep half of Shabbos. A person, most Jews keep half of Shabbos. When they're sleeping, they keep Shabbos, right?
But you say keep half Shabbos? Is that
Half of 24 hours they're keeping. They're not violating Shabbos for the time they're sleeping, right?
Shabbos is not defined by 25 hours. Shabbos is defined by the individual acts that you're doing. Each act in and of itself is by itself.
Just think of other examples where a person does only half the mitzvah.
I don't know how he can do half.
I have to
It's
think.
either you can have half a baby. You can't
Yeah.
decide halfway through.
That's a good point. I have to think about that.
It's either you do or you don't.
You're right. With most mitzvahs, that's the case. There's a definitive line. Either you did it or you didn't do it. So this person, sorry?
When you daven. You could daven without kavanah or with kavanah.
Right,
You
okay.
could deepen your mitzvah.
Okay.
It's not taking
Right, but
away.
that's
You're
after
doing
you've done it, now deepen it. Here, it's a good point. Think of other mitzvahs where you can do half a mitzvah.
Kosher, like you kosher by dairy out. We could say that. Like, they're kosher, but not they're only in their
Right. So
house.
when they're doing the mitzvah, they're doing the mitzvah, and when they're not, they're not. Here, it's like a mitzvah you're doing halfway. It's interesting. I don't know. Good question. I don't know.
You can.
I don't know how to qualify that. It's a good question. There is one example actually.
How well have you done it? How much have you invested in it? How all encompassing are you? But doing it or not doing it, you're doing it. Even if
So there is one other example.
one mitzvah, the entire Shabbos, you could say in theory you are doing because it's very possible we do something that we're not supposed to without even knowing.
But whenever you're doing it, you're doing it.
You're not doing Shabbos. You're doing Shabbos to the best of your knowledge. Even though you might not know, there's 10 different things that you can't do.
It's a good point.
So
So
Shabbos for the first time, and they've learned only what they've learned, and they're doing exactly what they learned. So in theory, to them, they think they're doing it, but to someone else,
Right.
they realize they're not.
there is one example of a half mitzvah, and that's tzitzis. The mitzvah of tzitzis has the white string and the blue string. And Rambam writes, and this is the halacha in Shulchan Aruch as well, that it's almost optional. You can either do the blue or the white or both. And if you do only the white or only the blue, you haven't compromised on your fulfillment of the mitzvah of tzitzis. So that's an example of a mitzvah that can be split in half. Where doing it, half of it, you did the whole thing. It's almost like optional how you want to do the whole mitzvah. That's an example. So I don't know if that applies here. Where like, if you did the Amunah part, you fulfilled the mitzvah, even if you didn't do the dot part, and vice versa. I don't know, but perhaps, maybe. That's an example of a half mitzvah.
In a way, it's kind of nice for it to be one mitzvah. Meaning, if you're weak on one side, you still get the mitzvah for doing the other
Right.
way.
Right.
If
If
that's
it's
how
correct
it
that you can like do half the mitzvah like
So
like
I'm gonna
tzitzis.
rephrase.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to the question, but
The
suggestion.
purpose of a mitzvah is to connect to the Eibishter. That
Yeah.
is the bottom line. A mitzvah is only a mitzvah because the Eibishter said for us to do it.
Right.
So the moment you put the effort toward doing the mitzvah, regardless of the completion, it's still a mitzvah, albeit it might not be.
Okay, so
you might have completed it, but you're still doing the mitzvah.
There's a halachic framework, and then there's like the spiritual framework. So if I put all my effort to get matzah, and there's a war raging, so no matzah is coming. So did I establish a spiritual connection with God? Probably. Did I fulfill the mitzvah of matzah? Absolutely not. Right? So effort is certainly not, I'm not discounting effort, but in terms of like qualifying mitzvahs, it has to have like a physical or a legal rubric. Right? The question is, what's like the legal rubric of the mitzvah of believing in God? Do you have to do both? Otherwise, you haven't done your You know what? I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say that doing the mitzvah halfway still counts as the whole mitzvah with regret to faith. And I'll tell you why. Because that would undermine many people, or present company excluded, of course, but other Jews out there in the world who are not spending their time to contemplate and feel God's presence in everything. Of course, we're all doing it all the time. But for those who are not, are we all discounted? None of us are fulfilling this mitzvah? I don't know. So maybe then it would actually be better to have it as one mitzvah. And then if you did, whatever part you did it. Like the tzitzis example. Rather than Rabbi Yoino, who's splitting into two, where unless you contemplated God's presence so deep that you felt it, according to Rabbi Yoino, you did not fulfill that mitzvah. So which means, present company excluded, many have not fulfilled that mitzvah. Whereas Rabbi would say you did, because you did the other part, the faith part. So maybe I'll go ahead and live and say that you could do the mitzvah halfway at least. So that way more of us are fulfilling the mitzvah. Perhaps.
Yeah, and I think people are maybe even limited. Like there might be someone who's exceptionally logical and refuses to believe in a heart.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's some people, you're designed, some people might tap into one part.
By expanding it, we make it more available to more people. Yes, I'm on that train. Okay, wonderful day, buddy. I should note, I wanted to mention this at the beginning actually, the classes in memory of Itta's brother, whose yahrzeit is this Friday, so that should be made noted.
His name is?
Machal ben Yibadal Chaim Tovim Yodaleib. Yeah. Okay, a wonderful day, buddy. And God willing, next week we'll begin the next section as we go into divine transcendence and faith.